All right. So hello everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I think I'll give people a few minutes to come in, enjoy the stream. Today we're going to be talking about Recoil, which, if you haven't heard before, is a state management library for React. And the other thing I should bring up too, Recoil React Europe. So the first time that I heard about Recoil was at this talk from David McCabe. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this was a talk that was at the virtual React Europe that happened maybe 2 or so weeks ago. And the talk is interesting to me just because what he's discussing is a kind of a completely different way to approach state management in React. And that's having more of a global state that you can share across different components in your app. And personally, that's something that I'm still relatively new to React. And that's something that I've always struggled with doing. And so that's something that I wanted to see whether it was something that was going to help me out. So I thought we would try it out today live on stream and just see how it goes. So if you have any experience with Recoil, maybe you've jumped in, it is still relatively new, feel free to reach out, help me out. I haven't tinkered with it yet. I sort of wanted this to be just like a raw reaction to me trying it out and seeing what I think, seeing how the APIs work, whether this is something that I think is going to help me out or not. So if you have anything you want me to try out in this library, like you've something you've been curious about, just let me know in the chat. I'm just going to bring up the chat here so that I have it handy. And we can chat about these things. We can tinker. We can try different things out. That's the basic idea. And Recoil has a website. It's recoiljs.org. And apparently they have a dark mode built into the site as well, which is interesting. And yeah, why don't we just try it? So what I have is I've got behind here a little sample app. Actually, it's over here. It's a little toy app that I use for a lot of different stuff for Kendo React. I work on the Kendo React team, which is we make a series of React UI components. And this is a sample app that I use just because it showcases the components, and it's just meant to be like a really simple little app that gives me a place to tinker. And it comes in handy when I want to try out libraries like this because it's an app that's real world-ish enough that I can bring it in and sort of get a reasonable take on whether it's something that I enjoy or whether it's something that works for me without being too complex. It's also not the world's craziest app as well. So why don't we just go ahead and try this. So this is an app that is built with Create React App. So I've actually already done this step as part of building this app up. And let's see, so to install, lives on NPM. So let's just do this. We NPM install Recoil. And I'll make this a little bit bigger so that we can see. I'll also be wiping sweat off my face a lot too. I don't know about everybody else, but it's gotten way too hot and humid here in Michigan. And even with, I turned the air conditioning on for this stream, and even still, I'm just sweating like mad because my body does not like hot weather at all. There's a reason I live in Michigan. It's because I like it a little on the cooler side than the warmer side. So I'll be sweating through this quite literally as we try out Recoil today. All right, so we have it installed. And all right, let's see. So components that use Recoil state need a Recoil root to appear somewhere in the parent tree. Good place to put this is in your root component. All right, so this app does have a root component. It's in this app file. And I have a router here. I suppose I should let's just do this. So we will be good citizens and just follow the documentation. And we will put a Recoil root around everything. So we'll do that. We'll use Option Shift F, which is one of my favorite VS Code extensions for formatting code. I find it works really good with React too. So we'll put that in, bring this out. TypeScript should figure out as part of this installation that Recoil is in here. That error should go away. And I think, if I understand this correctly, this basically gives you sort of one root component that can serve as like the basis for all of your global state. And so we'll try this out. And while this is running, did it not like... Cannot find a declaration file for Recoil. It implicitly has the TypeScript. We'll see if this works. We'll see if somebody already created this for us. It looks like they did, which is good. I recently switched over to trying to build everything with TypeScript. So you can see this project is primarily built with TypeScript and TSX files. Just because I wanted to see that, my only concern with it is that a lot of React code you find, TypeScript is still not the, it's not like the default for the React community. So sometimes I do run into little things like this where TypeScript is not as fully supported as I want it to be. But TypeScript also tends to find some bugs for me. And also, since those types do exist, it's probably going to make working with these APIs, like this is the exact sort of situation where I like to have TypeScript, because I'm going to start, I've never used these things before, so I'm going to start typing this. And TypeScript can help me if I do something stupid, tell me about it at build time, which is good. All right, so we have our app. If we refresh this, we should see we're just basically at our starting point. And all right, so we've got our app here, and I think the global state, I think we could start with something that's maybe a little bit contrived. So one piece of state I find that I need globally throughout my apps is the user. So in this case, it's hard-coded, and but user is something that could potentially change in your app. Your users could log in, log back out. This is hard-coded. So the first situation I had in mind is I wanted to try to store the user data at some sort of global state with Recoil, and then seeing how I could access and maybe change it throughout different components kind of randomly. And I feel like we'll try to get that to work, because that's a realistic situation that I've actually hit in apps. And then if you have anything else after we get done with that example that you want me to test out, experiment with, just let me know. Like I said, for those of you just popping in, I have not tried Recoil before, so this stream is very much about me just capturing my raw reaction to this thing, because it's something that I've been meaning to test out and see what I think. All right, so atoms are states in Recoil, and they can be read from and written to from any component. And components that read the value of an atom are subscribed to that atom, so that atom updates will result in a re-render of all components. All right, so since I'm going to do user data, the user right now is stored in this drawer router component, and actually this user is right here. And this is everything you need to know about the signed in user. And so let's see here. If I want to turn this into an atom, I think what I do, let's say, so I'm going to need to import atom. So I've got Recoil. I think atom comes from here. And why don't we just keep calling it user? Yeah, let's just keep calling it user and see what happens. All right, so you have to give this thing a key, which is a unique ID relative to other atoms and selectors. So I guess just user. And the default initial value, this is what we'll steal from here. we'll toss that in there. And all right, so this is going to break the app, or at least it should. Yeah, there we go. Because the user is now an atom, just fine, because now I need to go down and implement this. So I'm going to need the use recoil. This TypeScript is so nice. Use recoil state hook. And put that in here with my other state. So why don't we call it something different? Or actually, there's probably a reason why they called this user state. So let's do the same. User state. So that way down in here, we can say user set user. And I wanted to type react.useState just because it's a habit at this point. To use recoil state. And this is where we pass in the user state. And I'm actually curious if that just works at this point. So it looks like it did, because the rest of the app is, the user gets used up in here, so it had to be able to get this value. So at this point, our user state, basically nothing about this code is technically changed from a user's perspective at this point, because this user was hard-coded in here. It's still hard-coded in here, but now I'm calling this atom function, which is what I believe it's going to let us do is change that value. And actually, it might be easier. So this initials, I happen to know that we'll break this. I think it's kind of React type image. I think you could say type initials and then toss the initials in here. Let's see if that works. Otherwise, yeah, it does. Okay. This will just make it easier to change this up. So in here, this is going to be user.initials. Probably. Oh, I just need one. Duh. Okay. All right, so we have our initials. And what I want to check is, so we've moved this over. We've got this atom here, and we've got the initials. But let's suppose, because I think this is kind of common, that because this user data is saved over here, and let's say that there is a, we've already got a sign up form. Let's say that the user is actually able to change some information here. So if we go into sign up, what I want to do is clean up some of this clutter I had before. Let's say that in addition to username, password, that the user can also change their initials here. Actually, we'll do it on this one. Oops. Username, password, and Option Shift F again. Again, one of my favorites. So we'll say initials, which should be fine. This, by the way, if you haven't seen it before, this is the Kendo React form component, which is just it's part of the Kendo React library, and it's just a handful of little convenience elements for making forms easier to build. And for example, one of those is that when you use the Kendo React form, your submit function basically automatically has the state of your form. So if I type in stuff like this, I get that data in like a convenient JavaScript object rather than having to type like a million. You've probably written code like this before. I know I have, like React.useState. And then if you have like 20 things in your form, you have something like this. So the Kendo React form is designed to help you deal with that and making that process a little bit simpler. And for our purposes, it means that here we should have, so we can alert your initials are data dot initials, just to make sure that we have this data. Oh, TypeScript, you strike again. Technically, it wants us to really define the full type of object. Because really, if this were a production app, I'd probably want to take the time to design my data in a sense, like so the TypeScript knows what properties are going to be here to map to this form. But this is the good old TypeScript trick of typing any to just tell the TypeScript compiler, you know what, I don't care at the moment, which is not the greatest idea for your sort of production code or your production ready code. But for things like this where you're just sort of experimenting, it's a good just little hack to get around short term any problems that TypeScript has with your code. So, all right, we have our initials. And what I want to do is when the user submits some initials here, to change it up here and sort of vice versa. And so the way this works is I think I could just use the same thing. I guess we'll find out. So I'm going to import atom from Recoil. And again, atoms are basically the atomic units of state. And okay, so how do we get this? So I wonder do we need to export this text state from somewhere? So it can be read from and written to from any component. Components that read the value of an atom are implicitly subscribed to that atom, so that atom updates will result in a re-render of all that component. So if I defined this text state, which is the equivalent of this user state here, I wonder if I need to export this, or maybe like bring the user state outside of this drawer, which honestly might be a good idea to do anyways. Which is probably the route I'm going to go down here. I'm wondering if this key actually ends up being the default value. So like, I don't think this is going to work, but I'm going to try it anyways. So if I did, if I need to get the state, so if I did user state equals atom, does it need a default? It's not a default is missing. Yeah, I think this defines a new one. So what I'm going to do is let's create a completely new. I've got a data folder in here. So let's create a state file. We might as well just create this with TypeScript. And what I'm going to do is for my drawer container, I'm going to take this user state and move it out of here. So we'll move it in here. Export default const user state. We'll need to import atom. Let's see if this works. Quick fix. Yeah, there we go. So we'll bring in Recoil. We got to spell things correctly. That's always nice. And I can never remember the syntax for getting this correctly. I think it just doesn't like the default. So we have our user state, and it's now in a different file. So in here, now we're going to need to bring it in. So data/data and state and user state. So we'll bring that in. And actually, I wonder if this just works. So if we refresh, yeah, so, okay. So our user state is now in a separate file. We were able to bring it in here and use it. And it's actually kind of handy. So we have our state in here. And so now what I want to do is get over back to our form. And we've already brought an atom. We now need to also import from our data state, user state, and in here, set user, I think was the syntax, equals use recoil. Was it use recoil value or use recoil state? Use recoil state. I wonder what the difference is. We might have to look that up. Value? No, state. This is returns a tuple. The first element is the value of the recoil state, and the second is a setter to update that state. Sure. And we have our user state. So we'll pass that in there. And so what I want to do is let's like pre-populate this initials with what the value currently is. The user initials. And then when the user submits this in here, so instead of alerting this, we would say then set the user. Well, we'd say user dot initials equals data dot initials, and then set user with the updated user object. And we might have to do some, well, let's just see what happens. We might have to do some fanciness where we clone this or something. Cannot find name use recoil state. That's because we need to import it. So we'll do that. See, Ivana redeemed hydrate, so I will do so. I got some coffee in between my meetings here before this. I actually have, I don't know if anybody else does this, but so my wife is now working from home as well during the whole pandemic mess of a situation we have going on right now. So one thing we struggled with is we both wanted coffee in the afternoon, but we both kind of didn't because we don't want to get too addicted to coffee. So we make up 2 cups of coffee, one regular caffeinated and one decaf, and then just sort of mix them together. So it's sort of like split the differences. And so that's what I have here today, and I'm drinking. Just a pro tip, if anybody else is trying to not drink up drink coffee, but not drink too much coffee, it's a decent compromise that we've arrived on. And we have this. So, all right, let me blow up the font size here. So just to take a step back, what happened here is our state, our user state, is now in this atom that's in this state TSX file here that we're now importing into 2 different places. So we're doing it in this drawer container, which really this is like almost like app level component here because it controls this drawer on the side. And it also has this header. And so this state is controlling the initials here and also the initials here. And what should happen if we did this correctly is it's not changing it on the fly, so there's no on change here. But as soon as I submit this form, I should hit this handle submit, and the initials should update. So it's going to make me put in valid data, and if I put in my initials, oh, I think I do need an on change here, because otherwise, yeah. Why is it doing that? That's really weird. So I can't type in this at all. This field is required. So we'll fix that in a second. For right now, I'm just going to hack it, because they can't stop me from changing it here. Or can you? I might have typed something wrong. So that was really weird. So we'll try to fix that here in a second. Hey, Quantum, thanks for joining us today. So you see that this did work. So there's some nonsense going on with this input that we need to figure out. But when the value changed in here and we hit the submit, I was able to update this state and have it now stored in 2 different places. So the header is able to use it, and this form is able to use it as well. And I'm not totally sure what's going on here, to be honest with you. Maybe if we don't use our custom input that I might have screwed up. Might work as well. I think if we did component equals, let's just use a regular Kinder React input. No. All right, so I don't know what's going on here, but what we could do is we could, just to show this works, we could do an input. We could say its value equals the user dot initials, and then we could say on change, and on change we'll run a function, and we'll say set user. Let's see. So on change, does it get the value directly? Equals value. Close this up. TypeScript change event HTML input type is not assignable to type string. Yeah, I think this is like event, and then event.value. I wonder if TypeScript lets you do this. I'm just sort of making things up as you go. Event.target.value. Thanks, Quantum. All right, yeah, TypeScript likes that. All right, so what should happen now, if we did it correctly, that is really weird. Initials is read only. So I'm not sure what it doesn't like about this, but the general thing is working. I wonder if it's because we're using like a Quantum says you're not supposed to mutate state. Oh, so like not do this. I'm probably supposed to create a completely brand new object, I suppose, and then pass that to set user so that it's not mutating the state directly. Maybe. JavaScript object clone. I can never remember how to do this. This is always super confusing. Oh, God. I don't want a deep clone. User initials. So we're setting the user. Let's see. Quantum says, let me just copy this in. So in this case, we're setting the user to I don't think it's going to like this either. I see what you're doing, though. Basically using this to create a new object on the fly. Yeah, you had set state instead of user. This is something where I'm just not parsing this correctly. So what I might do is I just want to move this out so I'm not doing it all inline because that's starting to mess with my brain a little bit. So we could say on change, let's just get a clean starting point here. And we'll just say handle change. And then in here, so we have our event, and the initials will be event.target.value, so that should work just fine. And so now what we need to do is set the user, and we could set the user to, couldn't we just do it like this, user, and then and TypeScript's going to complain about this. Event that might not be the right change event. We know we're getting the right data, so I'm just going to fake TypeScript out at the moment and just say this event is whatever. All right, so we compiled at least. There we go. Okay, so what we were doing earlier might have just been a minor syntactical thing, because that was really strange. I think I must have just had an issue with, I don't know, parsing or something. But all right, so to take a step back, what's happening here, because I think it's kind of cool. So set user is coming from Recoil, and use Recoil state here. And so to me, at least, this feels like just normal React state management, except that because I'm using Recoil, this is data that's now shareable between components. So my user state lives here. It's something that, for example, if I go here, because of this change event, and I type it in here, I can update this data and have it update sort of in place in multiple places, which is cool. Yeah, Quantum, I think that's exactly it. I think it wasn't taking a mutator function because Baby Recoil doesn't allow you to do that. Hard to say. We could look into that in a minute. But I wonder, so can we make this take a function? Will it yell at us? So if we went like this route, TypeScript is already yelling at us, interestingly. Yeah, I'm not sure. We can look into this a little bit more and see what we can figure out. But I think in general, if I just go back to this code that works, to me, this is pretty darn elegant, honestly, because I know I've run into this situation in React apps that I work on all the time, that I have some state that I need to share between components. And this is actually a really elegant way of doing this, because I just get to put it in one external file that I can import into multiple places. And the code I use to update this looks a whole lot like just any other React state hooks that I normally write. So it's kind of cool. So that's pretty neat. Let's see. A selector. Selector is a piece of derived state. Derived state is a transformation of state. The output of passing state to a pure function that modifies the given state in some way. So I wonder if this is more like what we would need to replicate a mutator function. It's interesting. Selector tutorials on selector. Interesting. So I have one more example sort of in mind that we can dig into this to try out some other things. I've got actually an app that I need that I sort of want to try this out in. But if you have any other things that you're sort of curious about with Recoil and want to experiment with, let me know. Because there is quite a bit here. Use Recoil state versus use Recoil value. I think this is a way of getting like more derived information, and more than just like a simple value that you reuse. All right, so that was interesting. The other app I want to try this out on is, so this is one of my tester apps that I keep around. Another one is bring it up here and start it up. Run start. There we go. It's a little Pokemon testing app that I have as well. Bump the font size down in this one a little bit. That's basically like a glorified checklist app. And one thing I've been meaning to do in this app is that there's a couple different modes. It's basically a bunch of different checklists that live within this app that you can do things with. But the state for this, actually, it does the same API call on all of these pages, sort of completely unnecessarily, because there's just one data set. And so I wanted to use Recoil as a way of just getting that data and storing it in one place, which could get tricky because I want to see, like, I almost need to wait for, I could even really kick off the request for data when people, regardless of what part of the apps they arrive on, because there's just one API call that needs to happen regardless of situation. And so that's probably what I'm going to do. So this app actually doesn't use TypeScript, so the approach will be a little bit different. But we'll start by, we'll just install Recoil. So npm install Recoil. And right now, I have one service in here that controls all of the data. So this Pokemon.js file has this function to get Pokemon and then return it. And all of these other components that live within this app, they all call into this and use it. And really, there's not much of a reason to. Well, okay, this is going to be tricky because of this little variable that comes into play. But for now, let's just see if we can get the data and what we can do with it. So I've got Recoil installed. Let's start this up. Start this up. Yeah, so I want to cache. Basically, yes. So that I don't have to hit the API constantly. Really, more long-term, I could even do things like cache the data locally so that I don't have to constantly go out to the server. But at the moment, I just want the data to live someplace that's global to the app and have it in a place where I can get it whenever I need it. And actually, I might need something more like a selector for some derived state as well, because I don't just need to get the data, but I also need to do this logic that lives in here as well to actually filter this down. So I'm not totally sure how I want to architect that. But to start, we could just go into the home page. And this is another one of my testing apps. So I've got things like style components in here as well. This is just sort of like a little bit of everything in here, just depending on what I want to test and try out. So I'm going to grab that recoil root, and I will toss it around. Actually, I can probably put it just here. Recoil root. Just put it globally. Did it not like that? I think it did. mouse is freaking out all of a sudden. There we go. All right, so I think we have recoil in place. And what I want to do is let's create a new file. And I'm going to create, kind of like we did in the previous example, create a state.js file. Yeah, Quantum, this sounds like a typical use case for a service. How would recoil help here? I don't know if it would, actually. I just sort of want to test things out. I actually already do have a service in here. That is... I think it's in here. And so I could just put the sort of caching logic in here, that if I've already got it, just return it from the cache instead of going to the endpoint. And maybe that might be actually where I end up with this. Really, this is just sort of a contrived example that I can think of a way of doing this for a little bit more of a in-depth example of recoil. But it might be that the simpler thing is to just store this data somewhere in this service, and if it's already there, just to return that instead of fetching this directly. So we might end up there, and I might just rip all of this out, but this is basically just a stream for me to experiment with the APIs and see what I think. So I just wanted to test this out and see what it would look like if I just moved the state management to a global place. But just to sort of experiment with. You're right that probably just doing it in the service directly is probably a good idea, but just want to tinker around, see how this goes. And if let's see. So if I'm going to do this, so I'm going to need Atom. So we'll bring Atom in, and let's go back over here. Honestly, I still don't totally understand selectors as well, so I kind of want a chance to try that, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense, just to have something I can sort of test out. So if I want, try this, mon state being short for Pokemon. State, the default will be an empty array because this will start out being empty. And then in my home page, what I want to do is kick off the call to my service right away. So I'm going to need a few things in here. I'm going to need the service, and I'm going to need the state as well. State, I don't know if did I export this? All right, so we exported that. We have this here. Quantum got to just try to be careful with contrived examples, because shoehorning libraries into what they're not meant to will make them seem worse than they are. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. Sometimes I like to do it just, even if it is contrived, it's just a way for me to tinker. And usually my sign of like, for example, the previous example we did where we had the user data in the header and then in a form directly, actually felt really straightforward. And sometimes I do these examples that even if they're contrived, usually if it just what you're doing feels wrong, that's sort of just sort of tips me off that like I probably really shouldn't be doing this. So that's why I kind of want to go down this route and just see what it looks like. And if at the end of the day I like how my code is sort of architected and using it, or if this is just complete nonsense and just scratch the whole thing. And it just gives me a chance to play with the APIs as well, because even using them, sometimes I'll get ideas of, okay, like this doesn't make any sense here, but I can sort of understand some other Yeah, exactly what you just said. Sometimes you discover interesting things to do too. So sometimes even if it's not solving your problems, you just get some other ideas for a little more advanced thing or more interesting thing that you can do. So with that in mind, let's just see what happens. So I have our mon state, and so that means in here we will say const mons set mons equals use recoil state. And we'll need to import that. And then in here, I have to say get mons. Oh man, and this one's a page mode, which is sort of an implementation detail of this app, which I'll just hard code something for now. For this, and then then I should get back mons. I should be able to set this. So in theory, when this works, get mons is not exported from services as Pokemon. Oh, I set this up as a class, interestingly enough. An instantiable class, which is interesting, but for now, we can just instantiate one of these things. Let's do this. Why doesn't it like the constructor? Pokemon service is not defined. Did I not? Oh, yeah, duh. Okay. So we'll import this. Pokemon service is not exported. Slash. It certainly appears to be exported. Let's see what happens if we... Pokemon service is not... Okay, let me go to a component where it is used. Okay. I'm still not to export on ES6 imports and such. All right, so we have this, and this component must be used inside a recoil root. It is not. Oh, okay. I wonder if because it's a link, does this, let me see how I did this. Over on the decks. I would expect this to still be available. A Sacred Squash redeemed hydrate as well, so I'll have some coffee to think this over. This component must be used inside a recoil root component, which I would think it is. Does it not like that? How I'm accessing this specifically, like because I'm setting this in effect. Well, so first of all, I should be doing this. I wonder if that's. I wonder if it doesn't like that I'm doing this in an effect and not like based off some event that occurs in here. But that doesn't make much sense because the the other app that we did, I would have swore we just put our state more or less and handle it in exactly the same way. Your light theme offends me, but you already know that. Yeah, hashtag light theme for life. I'm not a fan of dark themes, and I don't understand the movement, but why wouldn't it like this component must be used inside a recoil root component? Why though? So is it, what part doesn't it like? So if I get rid of this, does it make it happy? No. If I get rid of this, do you get happy? Yes. Okay. Oh, okay. Hold on a second. So home is, okay. So our recoil root is actually, it probably wants me to put this in like the app level thing. Yeah, so I gotta be, okay. I gotta be broader than just the home component. I actually have to put this in the recoil root from recoil. And I don't think this div needs to be here. I think this can just be recoil root. Then it's going to yell at me. At least I would think it would yell at me for doing this. So the error message was actually super useful. I just wasn't thinking very well. But so now at this point, we should have, yeah. So we should be loading this data. We should have, I can quickly verify that we're hitting our back end here. And we have data. All right, so we should have data here, which is good because in theory now our data gets set in recoil and is available for other components to use. And so what that should also mean is that if I go in here, so now I'm going to take a totally different approach to this. I'm going to import my, let's see, it'll be data-state and my mon state from here. And so the very first thing this code is going to do is say get mons. But let's see. So now what it needs to do, and so this is where this is interesting because I have some logic that needs to run every time there is a new value that occurs here, including some nonsense code that you're not supposed to see here, that you're not supposed to judge me based off of. But this logic is very legit logic because it's basically sorting stuff, and it's sorting stuff that's specific to this component as well. So it's not something that should necessarily be happening globally, because I do want my state at this point, this should just have sort of the raw data. And the sorting stuff really does kind of belong in this component because it's happening based off of different things the user can set and such right here. So I'm actually curious. Yeah, so Sacred Squash, the idea of recoil is to basically make state more shareable between different components in your app. And so for those of you just joining us, I could bring up I think the previous example, because I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole just to help show this in like a far more, I think, realistic example before I head here is, once this starts up, is suppose you have like user data, and your user data needs to be used in several different components throughout your app. So you need it in the header to show the username. But you also need that user to show it in different parts of your app, maybe in some sort of a sign-up form or something like that. What you can do with Recoil is move that state to someplace that lives at a global level, and then import it into the components where you intend to use it using this syntax right here, where in this case I've got a set user value. And then what ends up happening if I refresh this is, so my user is already in this header, but then I can also put it in this form and change it. And when I change it, because I'm using Recoil and because my state is now global, that change occurs in multiple different locations. And I think the cool thing of this is, like, if you imagine that your app is way more complex than this, you might need that state in like 5 or 6 different places. And this is something that I've always struggled with React is there's always this struggle of, well, where does the state actually belong? Because suppose you're basically supposed to put it in the topmost parent where the state is being used. But if your component tree is super complex and it branches out lots of times, managing that and knowing where that state lives can be a real challenge. And Recoil is essentially aimed to solve that by giving you a single place you can store it, and then keep it in sync across different places where you're using it. And so this is I think this is genuinely useful and something that I know I plan on using. And the other example that I'm sort of tinkering with is just a little Pokemon sort of side project demo app that I have as well. And I've just been tinkering around in here just because I wanted to see if I could make this work, whether it made any sense for me to use in sort of a different context. And so what I tried doing, and this is seeming more like a bad idea as I go, but I have essentially a list of Pokemon that gets shown in different ways throughout this application, but all of them are driven by a single API call. And so I wanted to see, well, what if I stored this app state, the basically array of Pokemon that I plan on using, in a global state so that all of my components could then use it. And I'm now, as I get into this, realizing some of the challenges of doing so and thinking that this is probably not the greatest use case for doing this. And the reason for that is I have, for instance, the previous way this page worked is it would say, okay, hit the API, and then you need to actually do some things. And I'm kind of wondering with Recoil, and I'm actually wondering if it's into this selector thing where the state is actually derived. So derived state is a transformation of state. It's the output of passing state to a pure function that modifies the given state in some way. Yeah, pretty hard concept. This big issue to understand. Yeah, hard to wrap your head around. Yeah, I think it is, but I don't know. I feel like state management is also just tricky in any sort of UI system. I know we've got Alyssa in the chat here as well. This comes from a Angular perspective, and I've done Angular as well. And I was never super happy with any of the options I use for storing state in Angular. I would usually use services and have, but where exactly I put my data and used it always felt a little bit sort of icky. I think what I like about this approach is that it feels very much like other things in React. So if I bring up, so it feels a lot like using React hooks, but normally you would write this, if you had some state that you were just using in your components, you'd write it like this: setmons equals React.useState, and then you pass your default value in like this. So Recoil feels very much like doing that. So it feels like it fits in nicely into the React sort of ecosystem, the approach of doing things. but you have this ability to share that state across different components. And I'm wondering now, I actually just, let's see, we're at an hour, and I know Alyssa's going, she's going to be taking over the Code It live stream. Actually, Alyssa, if you want to drop in chat, I know she's going to be taking over the stream here momentarily, which she'll be covering if you want to stick around for that. But the last thing I want to do is I kind of want to get this selector option to work because I think I've gotten down a rabbit hole here. So what I think I'm going to do is switch back over to our simpler app. And I just want to see if I can figure out how this thing works. Because I feel like I should, because there's a getting started page and there's like two main headers. There's Atom and Selector. And I want to see what I can do here to see why this makes sense or why I might want to use it. So let's do that. So this is starting up. And let's know you must have time zones. You'll be on in an hour for some UI fun. Awesome. Time zones are hard, but they're easier if you just accept Eastern time as the canonical time zone. Then you don't have to worry. You just state everything in terms of Eastern US time. It's the proper way of handling that situation. Central time doesn't really exist. Or at least it shouldn't, right? Okay, so I want to, first of all, clear some things out. So I have my user state, and I want to do a selector, so I'm just going to make something up. So let's say in my app I needed to know, I don't know, what do we need to know? Let's see. Given state in some way. Let's say, so this is doing a character count. So what if we got, what if it was super important to us to, okay, I was losing my mind there for a second. I thought I lost my keyboard. Let's say that we need to track how many initials the initial length. So how many initials that we have in here. I don't know why we need to track that, but we want to just figure out how this API works. So we're just going to roll with it. So initial length state, and we'll say this is a selector because that's what we want to figure out how it works. So this is selector. We'll give it a key of initial length state, sure. And then we have a get. And I love how get is past an object that has a get property, because that's definitely not confusing at all. But if the docs say to do it, I'm in. So get, gets, get. Don't know who designs these things. And so our initials are coming from the user state, which is defined right above us. And we'll return initials dot length. Right? Oh no, we get the user. TypeScript's saving me again. User.initials.length. All right, so to keep with our example, we are going to say, so in this case, we just need a value. So now let's go back to our drawer component, drawer router container. And we'll say up here, so we have the initials, and let's just suppose that it's also super important if we have like, I don't know. Let's just do something stupid. I like to think stupid things. We have another H1 down here, and we need to show the initial length because our business users, they had a rough night last night. They came back with some wild recommendations for our apps, and we're just a lowly developer, and we are going to put this in. So we got initial length. We'll make it plural, initials length. And so now I think if I'm learning, which hopefully I am, we need the recoil value versus the recoil state. So state is for atoms. I think value is for these derived values. And we'll say const. So initials length equals use recoil. I'll get there. Use recoil value. And then Jesus, what did I call this? Initial length state. Names are hard. All right. Did we not do that? Did we not export it? Export const initial length state. We did. Did we not import it? We did not. So we need it from here. Okay. So in our app, excellent. Okay. So now we have the length of the initials down here, which is cool. So now what should happen is if we go to our page where we can change it. Oh, this is actually kind of slick. I kind of like this because basically I have my atoms, which are my raw pieces of state that I could subscribe to. And then I have my selectors, which can use the state and derive something based off of it. So actually, I think, I don't know if I want to get into this today, unless people really want to dive into it. But I think for my Pokemon app, this is actually what I need because basically I just store the data in an atom because the atom is just like the raw data itself. But then I could have a selector that I sort of subscribe to that takes that data and does something with it. Because essentially I could say, okay, I have my data, but the code I had, like in this example that does like the, that does like the filtering and such, I kind of think that could live in a selector that actually takes that data and does something with it. But this is actually fairly elegant, at least to me. If anybody has any questions, I think this is I think as I said in the start, if you were here, that really I just wanted to sort of experiment with Recoil, just a new library for state management in React, and to try it out in some simple examples. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out because I'm finding these APIs quite elegant in these situations where you do need to share state across these different components. And there's definitely more that I could do, but at this point, that's sort of what I wanted to check out. So if anybody has any questions, let me know. I'll stick on for another minute or so if there's anything else that you want to dive into, try out, anything like that. And if not, Alyssa, my coworker Alyssa, will be taking over the stream here in, I think, top of the hour, either 20 minutes or 50 minutes from now. She said this multiple times. So in an hour. So Alyssa will be here at the top of the hour to do some UI fun. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. Thanks for everybody for hanging out today. If you liked any of this, check out, or feel free to subscribe, that is, to the Code It Live stream. We're putting a lot more UI content on here. I know I'm going to try to make this time slot on Wednesdays a recurring sort of React time slot to dive into some React technologies. And Alyssa is going to do UI Wednesdays, so she'll be on here on Wednesdays as well. So if you're looking for just some UI content on Twitch or someplace to hang out, feel free to join us every Wednesday for this sort of thing. And if you like the topic, if there's other sort of React topics that you'd like me to dive into, I'm always looking for ideas and things that you're interested in. So feel free to drop that sort of thing in the chat as well. But other than that, have a good day, and tune back in a little bit for Alyssa.